Our story begins in a distant and barren place where the orange sky seemed unbearably hot. A woman was crawling across the dry, scorching sand. She seemed lost, and there was no one else around. A drop of sweat rolled down her face. The ground was so hot that it evaporated instantly. The woman looked up as if begging for someone to save her. While clutching a compass in her hand, she kept saying that this situation couldn't possibly be real. Going back a little in time, we discover that the girl's name is Alyssa Lane, the only daughter born into the Lane Marquise family in 200 years. The beloved youngest daughter who posed in a perfect family portrait. Alyssa had beautiful violet eyes, brown hair, and wore only the finest clothes that nobility could offer. She was so precious that her parents forbade her from leaving the house, as if Alyssa were a delicate flower being carefully cultivated. That was her public image. A girl was reading a book about a timid young woman who stuttered whenever she spoke, was afraid of people, spent all day locked inside a mansion reading books, and was an illegitimate daughter. In the end, it is revealed that the girl in the book was the real Alyssa Lane. Alyssa Lane knew her situation all too well. She had survived despite being born as an illegitimate daughter. Even so, she was accepted as the official daughter of the Marquise. And she was allowed to live as the only young lady of the Lane family, simply because she had been born as a girl who would one day be useful to them. Her father's looming figure towered over her like an evil spirit, so when the Marquise forced her to marry at the age of 17, no one found it shocking. A gentle golden light filtered through the surrounding plants. Alyssa and her future husband finally met, and he said it was an honor to meet her. The white-haired young man introduced himself as Gregory, one of the sons of the Baker Count family. Our protagonist curtsied gracefully and introduced herself as the daughter of Marquise Lane, a leading power behind the imperial capital, and a noble family from the north. A marriage between the two houses seemed to proceed without any major issues. Until the infamous day Gregory was caught committing adultery with a young woman who was married to another nobleman, and everything spiraled out of control. The enraged husband demanded to know how Gregory dared to touch his wife, threatening him with his sword. He demanded a trial by combat and charged straight at Gregory. Gregory survived the duel but was left crippled. The Lane family proceeded with the annulment of the marriage, despite the Baker family's protests. The legal proceedings dragged on for years and years. By the time the ruling was finally issued in favor of the Lane family, Alyssa was already 25 years old. To society, an unmarried woman of that age was considered old and was looked down upon as unwanted leftovers. Alyssa went to her father's office and asked if he needed anything. The Marquis declared that her next marriage had already been decided. He revealed that she would marry the Grand Duke of Tessin, and those words left our protagonist absolutely terrified. Oh my god, what was that supposed to mean? Riker Tessin, the commander of the Tessin Empire, the land of gold and death. He was the guardian of the western frontier, and also the Emperor's half-brother. And to make matters worse, apparently, he was a serial wife killer. It was well known that he had already been married 6 times. His first wife died under mysterious circumstances while returning to Tessin after her wedding to Riker. His second wife could not endure Tessin's harsh conditions and returned to her family, only to die from a mysterious illness. His third wife fled to save her life, but the Imperial Guards brought her back, and her carriage mysteriously plunged off a cliff. The fourth wife died as well. The fifth followed shortly after, and the sixth wife didn't last very long either. Alyssa had a terrible feeling that if she married Grand Duke Riker, she wouldn't live much longer. She could hardly believe that her father was unaware of those facts. She felt a deep fear that her father simply wanted her gone. Our protagonist absolutely did not want to get married again, because it could end very badly for her. Her father interrupted her, asking if she had anything else to say. Alyssa snapped out of her thoughts. Her father's gaze was cold and piercing. Alyssa was shedding tears and sweating from sheer nervousness. The girl was left speechless. She said she had nothing more to say, and he ordered her to return to her room immediately. The door closed behind her. Looking out the window, Alyssa noticed that the weather had been clear just a short while ago. Heavy, dark clouds brought the rain. Now back in her room, one of the maids was fixing her hair. Alyssa stared absent-mindedly ahead as the young woman gently ran her fingers through her hair. Then the maid called out to her. Clearly distressed, the young woman begged Alyssa not to marry the Grand Duke. She was startled by her own outburst. Wow, seriously. The maid quickly apologized for speaking out of turn, saying she had spoken without thinking. Alyssa told her it was all right. Stammering slightly, she asked to be left alone for a few moments. Our protagonist remembered a chest filled with wedding gifts that had arrived for their marriage. Alyssa recalled that he had asked her to look inside a small jewelry box. She lifted the lid of the little box. Wow, the jewelry sparkled brilliantly. Alyssa thought it all looked a little too extravagant. However, inside the box was an object she didn't recognize. What was it? She picked it up and wondered what it could be. It was far too large to be a pendant. Could it be some kind of royal artifact? It was a clock. It had golden hands and a deep blue face, the color of the night sky. Suddenly, Alyssa's entire room became dark and warped. Our protagonist was hurled into a distortion of time, where silver hands pointed towards strange runes and unrecognizable symbols. She continued falling, screaming in terror, unable to understand what was happening. The girl fell even farther, feeling her body plunge into nothingness. And at last, she fell into darkness. Alyssa got to her feet, wondering where she was. Suddenly, a thick drop landed on her face. She touched her skin, wondering if it was saliva. Right behind her, a ferocious creature roared, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. Alyssa finally realized the danger she was in. She turned around to look, but it was already too late. Our protagonist let out a nervous laugh, hoping all of this was nothing more than a terrible nightmare. And so, on the first day of January in the year 350 of the Benedict calendar, Alyssa fell into the underworld. From atop a crimson mountain, an intense white light shone brightly. Deep within the dark caves of the underworld, the sounds of things shattering echoed through the darkness. Alyssa was hiding behind a massive boulder, trying to protect herself from a gigantic creature. The girl looked utterly terrified. The enormous stone wolves were finally asleep. She knew this was her only chance to escape. Ever since she had fallen into the underworld and been found by that monster, that had been the day she left the world of the living behind. Alyssa refused to believe she was dead. Instead, somehow, she had been torn away from her own reality. She knew it sounded insane, but it seemed that she had become immortal. Something as small as a cut used to take an entire week to heal completely. Now, even if she suffered severe injuries, a single day was enough for her body to recover. But even when she first realized that she would never lose her life, no matter how desperately she wished to, Alyssa screamed at the stone wolves, but they ignored every word she said. All she could do was beg them to show her mercy. Skulls rolled across the cave floor as our protagonist demanded to know why all of this was happening to her. As time passed, despair gave way to fury, and the girl shouted at the savage beasts, asking what she had ever done to deserve such a fate. More skulls rolled across the freezing stone floor, clattering loudly as they bounced. Then Alyssa finally fought back. She did everything she could to resist. And at last, the girl decided to run, crawling her way through the grotesque figures that surrounded her. Would Alyssa truly be able to escape the underworld? What would happen if she were captured? What would those enraged beasts do to her? Our protagonist cried as she stared at her trembling hands. Alyssa was truly terrified, and so were we. She clenched her fist tightly, biting her lip as she desperately wished for a way out of that horrible place. She sat down on the cold stone floor, holding her own hands, and told herself that she would do whatever it took to escape. How brave! Alyssa started running. Just ahead, she could already see the exit. The girl was getting closer and closer to freedom. Then Alyssa wondered if she was even running in the right direction. Her exhausted feet pounded heavily against the ground. Ahead of her, a brilliant white light began to shine. It was her salvation. Our protagonist's eyes sparkled with hope. Now she just had to get a little closer. You're almost there, dear. Within just a few more meters, she could already see the rocky mouth of the cave. That's it, girl. Just a few more steps. Alyssa was determined to escape that hellish place once and for all. As she ran, however, she couldn't see the creatures closing in behind her. Massive stone claws lunged dangerously close to her face. The sound of claws scraping through the air echoed around her. Oh no! Once again, Alyssa's plans seemed to have been crushed. The stone beasts had gotten far too close. The wolves tore her clothes apart. Alyssa was disappointed in herself. How could she have failed again? That nightmare seemed like it would never end. She had lost her chance to escape and had become nothing more than entertainment for the stone wolves' cubs. Our protagonist cried as she realized they were still young and inexperienced hunters. She begged them to put an end to it all. The beasts drooled profusely. Their inexperience meant they couldn't finish off their prey with a single strike. The pile of bones in one corner of the cave kept growing larger and larger. Then one day, Alyssa had already lost count of how many times she had come back to life. She bitterly realized that perhaps marrying the Grand Duke wouldn't have been such a bad idea after all. Our protagonist felt deeply ashamed because she would have done anything to become the perfect bride for him. If she had known all of this would happen, she probably would have fallen to her knees and begged him to marry her. It would have been the perfect opportunity for him to get rid of his reputation as the bride killer. As she listened to the wolves, she realized they were taking much longer than usual that day. Alyssa hated having to endure that same pain over and over again. The stone beasts let out low growls. The cave was completely stained with crimson splatters. Then, in the middle of all that pain, Alyssa had an idea. What if she turned the situation around? She wondered how she had only just realized something so simple. After that thought, things should become much easier. The bones scattered across the ground were hard and sharp enough for her to use as weapons to defend herself. Unlike her, those stone creatures did not live forever. This time, the odds were completely in her favor. She started with the weaker beasts, taking them down one by one. Even so, they continued to snarl ferociously. Alyssa used the bones to defend herself from the wolves' massive jaws. Our protagonist was giving it everything she had. Yes, girl power. You go, girl. Her face covered in crimson stains, Alyssa yelled at the beasts to go to hell. Their stone bodies began to crack. And finally, they shattered into thousands of rocks that crashed onto the ground. Alyssa looked around in annoyance as the stones continued to fall. Finally, it was about time. At last, she dropped the bone onto the ground. Our protagonist crouched down to retrieve something she had hidden inside a narrow crevice. It was something she had done ever since she first found herself trapped in the underworld. At last, her fingers touched something round. She had hidden the clock, the very object she was convinced had brought her to that hellish place. Alyssa was relieved to have found it. Deep within that dark place, the clock was the only object that allowed her to keep track of time. Its hands pointed to January 19th. She was certain she had fallen into the underworld on January 1st. She looked sadly at the clock, wondering how many times she had died and come back to life in less than 20 days. Then she turned away. Consumed by rage, she kicked several rocks while repeating the question to herself. She was furious after enduring so much pain at the hands of those creatures. No matter how many times they had attacked her, she was still standing, alive and strong. She cursed every creature that had ever hurt her in that hell. Consumed by anger, Alyssa kicked more and more rocks. Suddenly, her shoe split a boulder clean in half. She stared in shock at what lay before her. Right beside her foot, a small yellow crystal shimmered brilliantly. She bent down to pick it up. The stone was diamond-shaped and radiated a golden light. Wow, what could it possibly be? Alyssa held the small crystal as though she were hypnotized by it. Her eyes followed every fragment of light, and she wondered what it was. In another world, a golden jewel gleamed from a cufflink. A nobleman was summoned by his butler, who announced John's arrival. The man apologized for disturbing his lordship's rest and explained that an urgent matter required his attention. The nobleman revealed that he had seen a carriage bearing the Rain family's crest pass through the front gates not long ago. He asked whether another young lady had already departed. John stammered before replying that it wasn't exactly what had happened. Finally, he revealed that the Marquise's daughter had disappeared. The nobleman laughed once again, saying that such riddles made no sense at all. He rested his hand against the window. Then he declared firmly that it didn't matter whether she had truly disappeared or had simply run away to escape the marriage. Either way, she had been destined to be eliminated. Far away from there, a young woman leaped high into the air to attack a monstrous creature. It was April 1st, in the year 3058. Alyssa, our protagonist, had become a fearless warrior after spending 8 years in the underworld. She struck the beast's armor with perfect accuracy. That strike seemed to be incredibly effective. The truth was that Alyssa had survived hell, and now she stood victorious atop the body of her defeated enemy. She flashed a wide smile. The girl looked remarkably cheerful during the hunt. Despite everything she had been through, she was still beautiful and radiant. Alyssa searched through the enemy's armor, looking for something. In the distance, unnoticed by her, someone with cat ears was watching her. Wow, who could that be? The mysterious young man had long, razor-sharp claws and a mischievous grin. The girl managed to collect several beautiful gemstones. He seized the opportunity to make a huge leap. The young man stealthily approached Alyssa, as agile as a cat. Meanwhile, Alyssa admired the jewels she had obtained from the hunt. However, the catboy's ambush was completely unsuccessful, and he ended up punching the ground instead. Alyssa skillfully leaped into the air, grabbed him by the hair, and demanded to know who he thought he was. He was so shocked that he couldn't react quickly enough. She placed both hands on his head, then used the momentum to drive her knee straight into him. Alyssa kicked him hard in the face, demanding to know how he dared try to steal her precious belongings. Our protagonist jumped back and declared that stealing was a sin even in hell. The catboy was sent flying. With a piercing stare, Alyssa asked whether she had made herself clear enough. The fallen young man tried to shield his face from another blow. He begged her to spare him. "Are you kidding me? Is he really asking for mercy in hell?" Alyssa was completely astonished when she realized the monster could actually speak. Her staff slammed into the ground right between his legs, leaving him completely cornered. The catboy bowed low to the ground, begging for forgiveness and offering his mana stones as an apology. Still bowing, he even promised that he would never set foot in that place again. Alyssa remained silent after hearing his words. She asked the young man if he knew where they were. The catboy answered that they were in West Auric. Our protagonist was stunned to learn that this place actually had a name. Long ago, when she first fell into this place, the only thing she knew was that she was in hell. She raised a hand to shield her eyes, wondering what kind of place this really was. She had made that discovery thanks to a book she had read while she was still young, during her time at a monastery. It described a desolate land where the relentless heat never ceased. Evil creatures roamed freely, and enormous fissures scarred the earth. Alyssa asked the young man what those gemstones were. All she knew was that those pink crystals made her stronger whenever she ate them. She asked the catboy if they were mana stones. The young man asked whether she really intended to leave something so precious lying on the ground. Alyssa became curious about how valuable they really were. The catboy explained that they were extremely valuable and that they were the largest mana stones he had ever seen. Deep down, he thought about how much stronger he would become if he obtained those stones. To his complete surprise, Alyssa revealed that she would let him keep every single one of them. Wow, now he was the one who was completely confused. Alyssa confirmed that she was serious, but in return he would have to give her some information. Far away, a large crow let out a loud cry. Mana stones were crystals of pure power created by the concentration of magical energy. Alyssa suddenly pushed open the massive doors of a grand green hall. If she wanted to obtain more mana stones, simply hunting monsters would never be enough. Mana stones found inside wild monsters were merely the result of chance, because every creature had a limit to how much magical energy it could accumulate. Demons, however, possessed intelligence and were completely different from the monsters wandering the wild. They controlled magic itself, accumulating power before attacking weaker beings to steal their strength and increase their own. That meant the stronger the demons Alyssa hunted, the more power she would gain. Alyssa walked forward with determination as she thought about every region of hell: East Noah, West Auric, South Fenzi, and North Kaya. She thought about all the demon lords who ruled over castles throughout hell. An intricate painting depicted an ancient battle that had lasted for ages. Alyssa pounded forcefully on the door. It creaked open with a loud groan. Just ahead, a demonic creature sat upon a green throne. The demon welcomed Alyssa, who had finally arrived at the castle of West Auric. It introduced itself as the warden of the West Hall and master of the castle. Before the creature could say another word, Alyssa hurled her spear across the room. Wow, a direct hit. She looked at it coldly and simply said that she had no interest in knowing who that beast was. The great green hall fell completely silent. Alyssa walked up to the throne to retrieve her spear. She smiled brightly as she looked at the mana stone, declaring that it was the largest mana stone she had ever obtained. As the mana stone floated in the air, she wondered whether she should head north or east first. Before she could make a decision, the stone shattered into smaller pieces. Alyssa looked relieved because no matter which direction she chose, she had plenty of time. Suddenly, something caught her attention. Her expression became frightened and confused. She asked what was happening. All of a sudden, above her was a ceiling adorned with a golden chandelier. Alyssa was back in her old bedroom. How was that even possible? Her legs were still weak from what had just happened. A white dress fluttered through the room. Alyssa touched her head and wondered if she had returned to the real world. She opened her eyes, trying to understand what was happening. The girl knelt in front of her mirror and demanded to know what was going on. Yeah, we don't understand either. Apparently, she had gone back 8 years into the past and was young once again, with none of the scars she had earned from her battles in the underworld. Alyssa was completely astonished. Her skin was flawless once again, yet her beautiful lilac eyes remained just as striking. She noticed how much younger she looked. Could it have been because of the mana stones she had obtained? Wow, she seriously needs to tell us what kind of treatment that is. However, her ankles still hurt badly. The girl wondered if she had twisted it during the fall. Then she noticed one crucial detail. Alyssa took a closer look at her body and realized she was nothing but skin and bones. What had happened to the strong physique she had built over the years in hell? Our protagonist panicked as she wondered what had happened to her body. She was far more fragile and vulnerable now. Like this, she would never be able to lift a spear, let alone throw one. Alyssa was devastated because she had lost all of her strength and vitality. She had worked so hard to gather countless mana stones and become powerful, but now it was all gone. Suddenly, someone knocked on her bedroom door. The unexpected sound startled our protagonist. From outside, a maid introduced herself as Daisy. Alyssa flinched when she heard the young woman asking for permission to come in. The room seemed to spin around her. The whole world felt like it was moving at incredible speed. Alyssa hurried beneath the blankets to hide herself before finally allowing the maid to enter. Daisy wished her lady a good morning. The maid asked whether she had slept well. Alyssa replied that she felt well rested before asking the maid something, but she quickly sat back down on the bed, clearly frightened. After all, what in the world was happening now? Our protagonist asked the maid how old she was. Daisy couldn't understand why she was asking such a question. Alyssa remembered the last conversation they had shared. Back then, the maid had worn a completely different hairstyle. The maid simply replied that she would soon turn 22 and asked her lady if something was wrong. Alyssa's hair fluttered gently in the breeze. As she sank deeper into her own thoughts, our protagonist realized that she hadn't merely become younger. She had actually traveled back in time, precisely to when she was 17 years old, before her life had been ruined. Outside, the sky was bright blue with only a few clouds drifting by. What a beautiful day. Alyssa lay in bed, supported by a young woman with long hair and Daisy. She tossed and turned restlessly, perhaps dreaming of terrible things while someone tried to touch her. When she woke up, she was terribly thirsty. A woman wearing a green dress tried to bring her back to her senses. She embraced Alyssa and gently told her to drink the water slowly so she wouldn't choke. Alyssa remained silent as she listened to the woman ask whether everything was all right. The woman had been deeply frightened after learning that the girl had suddenly fainted. The woman was stunned when Alyssa said, "Thank you, mother." Apparently, that response had caught her completely off guard. In a brief journey into the past, a maid called out to someone in the palace corridors. Further ahead, a butler begged the lady not to continue, but the woman was determined and refused to stop for anyone. She declared that she had no idea there were places forbidden to the lady of the house. Or were they hiding something from her? The butlers whispered nervously among themselves because she was heading toward the south wing of the palace. They needed to inform Marquise Lane immediately, or things could end very badly. The Marquise had secretly brought an illegitimate child to live with them in the mansion. Until that moment, she had been raised without the lady's knowledge. Lady Lane's presence was intimidating, as she stared threateningly at the little girl. Lady Lane asked if she was Alyssa. The little girl looked back at her with obvious concern. One of the maids hurriedly tried to explain the situation. The lady knelt down and softly greeted the little girl. She introduced herself as Alyssa's mother, while the maid watched the two of them with great concern. Alyssa was overcome by a terrible feeling, and her expression changed. She remembered a terrible moment from her past, when that very same maid had shielded her from her father as he shouted at the little girl, telling her that nothing belonged to her. The man told her she should be grateful for being given that chance in life, then but that she must never dare to desire anything more. Those words haunted the little girl, whose future was uncertain. Frightened, little Alyssa hid behind one of the maids. Lady Lane apologized to her, explaining that she hadn't wanted to frighten the little girl with such an unexpected visit. Alyssa heard the woman say that she was overflowing with joy to have her there, and that was why she had come without warning. However, she would leave shortly. The little girl felt so guilty for her father's sins that she didn't believe she deserved to be the daughter of someone so kind and beautiful. Her very existence was a living symbol of her father's infidelity, weighing upon her like a sin. But that didn't seem to affect Lady Lane, who gently called Alyssa's name. It took Alyssa a very long time to realize that her mother's smiles had always been genuine. Years later, our protagonist would become a fragile young woman who was too ashamed to call her mother. Alyssa sadly remembered that this had become one of her greatest regrets during her time in the underworld. That was precisely why calling Lady Lane mother had surprised the noblewoman so much. She smiled and noticed that her daughter must be very thirsty. The noble lady told the girl that if she needed anything else, all she had to do was ask. Meanwhile, Daisy quietly closed the door behind them. She had unexpectedly noticed that Lady Alyssa had spoken without stuttering and had finally called Lady Lane mother. The maid walked away, wondering how someone could change so completely overnight. It was as though Alyssa had somehow come back to life. Lady Lane asked whether she had fainted because of weakness. A cup of herbal tea would surely do her some good. Our protagonist gently held her mother's hand. Then she asked the lady whether Sir Gregory Baker had already been chosen as her future fiancé. The lady looked at her in surprise. Lady Lane took her daughter's hand and gently reminded her that she was still very young. Alyssa realized that she had traveled back to a point before her engagement to Gregory had been announced. She tried to convince her mother by explaining that she didn't truly love Gregory. Perhaps she still had a chance to change her fate. Marriages between noble families were powerful political alliances between kingdoms and their great houses. Even with the influence of House Lane, would her mother truly be able to help her? Lady Lane told her to leave everything to her. To Alyssa's surprise, the lady confessed that she didn't like Gregory as a suitor either. Although she couldn't quite explain why, there was something about the young man that reminded Lady Lane of her husband when he was younger. Mother and daughter embraced, and Lady Lane assured her that she had nothing to worry about. Everything would be resolved soon, and Alyssa would never be forced into a marriage she didn't want. Sometime later, someone hurried down the corridor. Seated in his office was Marquis Lane. He was writing something indecipherable with a fountain pen. What could it be? A secret message? Some ridiculous conspiracy? As he continued writing, he heard someone ordering him to release her mother once and for all. She had been incredibly bold to walk into his office without first being announced by a butler. Honestly, how rude could that be? The cruel Marquis ordered his daughter, Alyssa Sirius Lane, to return to her room immediately. Now glaring at him threateningly, Alyssa asked if that was truly all he had to say after she had discovered that her mother was being confined inside one of the palace's rooms. She stepped dangerously closer to him, calling him by his full name, Marquis Walter Lane. The Marquis coldly warned Alyssa to be more careful with her words because walls had ears. The girl found it outrageous that he tried to justify himself by claiming that her mother was gravely ill and needed extensive care and complete isolation in order to recover. Alyssa slammed her hand down hard on the desk. That confinement was actually because Lady Lane had opposed the arranged marriage with Gregory. That's right, girl. She accused the Marquis of imprisoning the lady of the house inside her own chambers, despite never having truly cared about her health. He was a petty man who cared only about protecting his own reputation. Our protagonist stepped toward him in a threatening manner. Then, with a cold, ominous gaze, she asked what he would do if she smashed her fiancé's head with a hammer. The Marquis was horrified by the damage such an act would do to his reputation. Alyssa had no right to defy him. The cruel man slapped her across the face. Alyssa revealed that she wasn't threatening him. Rather, she was simply demonstrating the extent of her self-control.
Woohoo! She was incredibly brave.
The girl stared at the man with a piercing gaze, revealing that he was actually the one she wanted to eliminate immediately. The Marquis was shocked by her expression, wondering if she had always looked at him that way. He had always known there was something wrong with his daughter. How could she have gone from being such an obedient creature who never dared utter a single word of protest, to becoming a defiant woman who would dare march straight into my private office and glare at me with such hateful eyes? Her eyes had hardened like those of a warrior who had gone to hell and returned. He realized he was entertaining ridiculous thoughts. A bead of sweat rolled down his chin as he thought that this creature was the very same child who once trembled at the mere mention of his name. There was no way she could have changed so abruptly. The cruel Marquis believed it was merely a belated display of rebellion. After all, children were like that, weren't they? Once again, he insisted that she return to her room immediately. Defying the orders of the head of the household was a grave offense worthy of punishment. The man said that because she was still very young, he would let this incident pass. However, she would remain confined to her room until she showed genuine remorse for her actions. Alyssa asked the blonde young man what he thought about everything that had happened. He nearly spat out his tea. The young man asked her what she had just said. Alyssa replied that he was speaking far too loudly. He was Harry, the second son of the Lane family. A young man with delicate blonde hair and blue eyes. He shouted at his sister, saying that she had been banished from the main castle and didn't seem to care in the slightest. Harry asked whether she wasn't worried about having displeased their father. Alyssa simply replied that it was a relief not to have to live with him anymore. Then the girl asked whether there was any news about their mother. Harry revealed that she had been released from confinement, but had been forbidden from going anywhere near the south wing of the castle. After hearing that order, she had still tried to go there. However, their older brother had been doing everything he could to stop her. The eldest son of the Lane family was Felix. Alyssa imagined how difficult things must have been for Felix. The girl asked her brother whether, given her current situation, he could at least deliver a message to their mother on her behalf. She heard Harry say that he had been worried about her, which was why he had come to see her. Then Alyssa suddenly realized something she had completely overlooked. But what could it be? Our protagonist hadn't realized that she and her brother had actually been close. That realization caught the young man completely off guard. He gave an awkward smile and said that apparently she had no idea just how much he cared about his only sister. Alyssa found that comment rather strange. The girl admitted that she had never realized Harry felt that way. Although it was an unfamiliar feeling, she couldn't say it was unpleasant. She was an illegitimate child who had never expected them to necessarily hate her, but she certainly hadn't expected their kindness either. Alyssa felt grateful that she had returned to the past. Our protagonist asked her brother how far the preparations for her marriage had progressed. He revealed that the negotiations between the two families had already been completed. Only the imperial approval and the official public announcement remained. Alyssa fell deep in thought as her brother asked whether she really hated Gregory that much. She asked whether he remembered her debut. He answered that of course he did. On the night of her debut, she had stepped into the center of the castle's grand ballroom. The humiliation Alyssa experienced that night had been so overwhelming that she shut herself away in her room for weeks afterward. Unfortunately, she still remembered every cruel remark made by the guests. Those words would continue to haunt her for a very long time. A man stopped directly in front of her and sarcastically asked whether she needed any help. Alyssa recognized him immediately. Our protagonist revealed to her brother that the cruel young man was Gregory Baker, and that was how her debut ball came to an end. Harry asked whether she wanted him to get rid of that bastard right then and there. As she picked up an envelope, she admitted that she didn't think her brother should do that. Still, she appreciated the offer all the same. Alyssa regretted not realizing these things sooner. With a threatening look in his eyes, Harry asked whether he could challenge Gregory to a duel. Wow, what a brother. Instead of answering him, Alyssa handed the young man an envelope decorated with a purple ribbon. Harry became curious about what was inside the letter. We're curious too. He was utterly shocked when she asked him to deliver the letter to Riker, the Grand Duke of Tessin. The blonde young man became even more confused, having no idea what to make of it. Wow, that definitely caught us by surprise. He asked her what the hell was going through her mind, but she refused to tell him, saying only that Harry had to be as quick and as discreet as possible. Far away from there, in the kingdom of Tessin, at the Grand Duke's estate, a man tossed several ornate documents aside. The marriage negotiations between the imperial family and House Greitz were classified as extremely confidential. Even so, a very courteous letter arrived for Riker, warning him to be careful with his future bride because she was very frail. Those men were the head butler, Henrik Lang, and his assistant Roderick. Riker Tessin asked the men who could possibly have leaked that secret. Roderick nervously replied that he had only learned about the marriage arrangements that very day, explaining that it was impossible for the rumors to have originated there. The ruthless Grand Duke thought for a few moments. Then he ordered Henrik to remain at the main castle while Roderick prepared for an immediate departure. The men looked surprised, and Roderick asked whether Riker truly intended to go meet this Alyssa Lane. The Grand Duke tapped the letter with his fingers, saying, "On the day autumn becomes winter, at the great stones beside the Grand Monastery." He asked whether that was truly an invitation or not. Riker ordered them to keep the escort as small as possible so they wouldn't attract attention. Shortly afterward, the two men were dismissed. They departed, leaving Riker alone in his office. He thought the stationery looked terribly tacky. Who on earth would be wishing him congratulations? Riker had no idea who Alyssa Lane was or what she could possibly want with him. Meanwhile, the girl wondered whether he had already received her letter. The carriage continued peacefully through the forest. Alyssa asked Daisy how much longer it would take to reach the rocks near Dolores Monastery. The maid replied that they were almost there. The girl commented that it was much farther away than she remembered. She was relieved that her mother had lent her such a comfortable carriage because the constant swaying usually made her nauseous. Alyssa was happy because, thanks to her mother's thoughtful gesture, she wouldn't suffer from motion sickness. Wow. Lady Lane truly was incredibly kind. However, her plans were suddenly ruined when a massive impact struck the carriage. Our protagonist gasped and her eyes widened. The horses neighed loudly in panic. What could possibly be happening? The large carriage shook violently. The horses galloped about in confusion, their pounding hooves echoing loudly. The carriage wheels spun at incredible speed. A tremendous crash filled the air. On the opposite side of the carriage, Daisy shielded herself while Alyssa felt a sharp pain in her head. She could hardly believe that a single violent jolt had left her so dizzy. After all, back when she lived in hell, she had ridden gigantic beasts without the slightest problem. How could she have become so weak? But the bigger question was, were they being robbed? She doubted anyone would be bold enough to openly attack a carriage bearing the Lane family crest. Daisy asked Alyssa to stay inside while she went out to investigate. Our protagonist panicked and begged Daisy not to go outside. The maid opened the carriage door just a crack. Before she could step out, something struck her. Oh no! Alyssa caught Daisy in her arms, desperately calling for her to wake up. The girl realized that she was still breathing, but she had lost consciousness. My God! A poison dart had struck the maid. She recognized the scent of cinnamon and cypress. It was a very specific poison. Alyssa couldn't believe such a thing was possible. She remembered the name of that toxin. Suddenly, the carriage door swung open, and a blonde man found them inside. A young man stepped into the carriage, apologizing for the intrusion. Alyssa continued holding Daisy in her arms without saying a word. The young man gently took the unconscious girl into his own arms, explaining that they couldn't allow any further Imperial information to be compromised, so they had been forced to take drastic measures. Wow, so they were the ones who shot Daisy. Riker Tessin asked Alyssa Lane to step out of the carriage. Or would she prefer that he call her by her codename, Sirius? He had hair like molten gold, skin as white as snow, and clear, brilliant eyes. People often said that he hadn't inherited the Imperial family's features. Instead, they claimed that Riker Tessin possessed a sinister appearance. But then, how could he possibly be so handsome? Wow, he really was unbelievably attractive. The Grand Duke judged that, based on Alyssa's appearance, it was hard to imagine she was the kind of bold woman who would send such a strange letter. Alyssa looked sadly at her dress, now stained from all the chaos. To everyone else, it probably looked as though he were cornering a delicate noble lady like her. Riker commented that he had heard Lady Lauren of House Greitz suffered from a heart condition. Our protagonist smiled sweetly at him. Apparently, considering her frail constitution, there was a very good chance she wouldn't survive the long and grueling journey to Tessin. Alyssa's condition was a secret known only to her closest relatives and her personal maid. Alyssa asked if he really wanted to know. Riker extended his hand to help her out of the carriage. However, to his surprise, she declined and stepped down from the carriage on her own, saying that the meeting place mentioned in the letter wasn't there. She said they only needed to walk a little farther to reach their final destination. Riker clenched his hand in irritation, annoyed by the girl's audacity. He had heard she was a timid and submissive young lady, but this girl matched that description in no way at all. Turning to leave, the Grand Duke asked whether there was any chance he could refuse her offer. However, he was curious to know why he had been invited there in the first place. Alyssa simply replied that there was something she wanted to confirm. Legend had it that those 7 stones formed a sundial. From sunrise until the end of the day, it marked the time of the living. But the night belonged to the realm of the underworld. That was why non-human beings could not pass through the ruins during daylight. Alyssa asked curiously whether the Grand Duke had ever stepped inside the sundial. He answered that he had not. The girl seemed a little disappointed and admitted that she had expected that answer. Then Riker walked past her. He slowly turned around and asked whether she wasn't coming with him. The Grand Duke found the girl's behavior extremely strange. What could she possibly be plotting? Was there some hidden trap among the ruins? In the end, Alyssa's smile revealed nothing. Riker walked between the stones, thinking that even if there were a trap, escaping it would be easy for him. Standing outside, Alyssa remarked that apparently he really was a human. He didn't understand why she had said that. The girl asked whether he wasn't worried as the leaves swirled around him. Wow, what a tense atmosphere. What happens next? Alyssa explained that if he had been unable to enter the ruins, it would have meant he wasn't truly human. Riker asked whether there had been any real reason for him to worry. Apparently, Alyssa had believed the rumors claiming that he was a demon. The girl told the Grand Duke that he was a very brave man. What if those ruins possessed some kind of mysterious power? After all, Alyssa knew that hell was real. So why couldn't a sundial distinguish humans from other kinds of beings? And what did that reveal about her? Our protagonist had fallen into hell and traveled through time. Was Alyssa still human? Or our protagonist absent-mindedly played with her dress while Riker stared at her? Apparently, Alyssa was still human. Phew! What a relief. Riker thought the girl was very peculiar. She thanked him for his patience. Alyssa stepped very close to the Grand Duke and declared that her curiosity had finally been satisfied. Wow, look how close they're standing together. Then our protagonist realized just how close she had gotten. Much too close. Too close for comfort. Noticing the distance between them, Alyssa quickly stepped back and decided it was finally safe to introduce herself properly. She curtsied gracefully and introduced herself as Alyssa Lane, the person responsible for sending the letter to the Grand Duke. Alyssa revealed that she was the daughter of... Before the girl could finish speaking, Riker interrupted, saying that he already knew who she was. She was the daughter of Marquise Lane. The girl replied that if he already knew her identity, then everything from that point onward should be much simpler. She knelt on the ground, addressing him by both his name and his royal title. That completely caught the Grand Duke off guard. Alyssa extended her hand toward him and asked Riker Tessin to marry her. An awkward silence fell between them. The Grand Duke was absolutely convinced that Alyssa was completely insane. On a beautiful sunny day, right there among the ancient ruins, Alyssa proposed marriage to Riker. Somebody pinch me, I can't believe this is actually happening. Alyssa continued insisting that the Grand Duke of Tessin accept her as his wife. However, he seemed completely disgusted by the proposal. She tried to explain that she understood how sudden everything seemed, but she assured him there were absolutely no disadvantages. Riker angrily asked whether she truly believed he had come all that way just to listen to such utter nonsense. He began walking away from Alyssa, saying that the entire conversation was utterly ridiculous. Alyssa watched the man walk away. She called out, asking him to wait. The girl got to her feet, explaining that he still hadn't heard the rest of her proposal. Riker simply replied that he wasn't interested. She hurried after him, trying to persuade him by asking whether he wasn't curious about how she had learned the Empire's secret. Alyssa grew more and more anxious because things weren't supposed to turn out like this. He was supposed to be curious. Meanwhile, Riker was mentally calling our protagonist every name under the sun, until suddenly he seemed to be struck by some kind of violent attack. His body appeared to be overtaken by sinister vibrations. Apparently, it was a vicious cycle that had never truly ended, and agonized voices began consuming his body.
Oh no! How horrifying!
Riker began to writhe in agony, wondering if he had wandered too far away from Tessin. He needed to return immediately. The Grand Duke leaned against a tree, and Alyssa, worried about him, cautiously approached to see what was happening. She asked if he was all right, but the man didn't seem to hear her. Alyssa reached out her hand, trying to support him. The voices had completely taken over the Grand Duke's mind. Acting on pure instinct, he shoved Alyssa away, causing her to fall to the ground. Riker was breathing heavily, overwhelmed by the terror consuming his body. Our protagonist looked at him in complete confusion. Suddenly, her expression became far more determined. Our girl wasn't about to let this go. Out of nowhere, something seemed to catch the Grand Duke completely off guard. Alyssa grabbed his hand. The girl begged him to let her help him back to his carriage. That single gesture left the man speechless. And then Riker Tessin realized something completely unexpected. The voices had disappeared. Now all that remained was the sound of the wind. He wondered whether that had happened because of that strange girl. Meanwhile, Alyssa could only wonder whether he was angry that she had taken his hand without permission. She slowly began pulling her fingers away. To her surprise, he grabbed her hand again. Alyssa hadn't expected that at all. Neither did we, girl. Riker pulled the girl closer and ordered her not to let go of him. Our protagonist was completely confused now. Sometime later, the two of them were sitting together on a bench. How adorable. The girl was still trying to process everything that had happened. Then she asked whether they were really going to continue the conversation while holding hands. Riker looked rather surprised and replied that it was a condition for the conversation to continue. The Grand Duke anxiously asked what Alyssa wanted from him. She was absolutely delighted. At last she might finally get what she wanted. She insisted that they get married, and if he agreed, she would make 4 prophecies about his future. Riker thought the proposal was completely absurd. He asked how he was supposed to believe her prophecies. Alyssa cheerfully replied that he had come to meet her because everything written in the letter had been true. The man fell silent because he realized she was right. He admitted to the girl that no sane person would ever dare propose marriage to him. Getting straight to the point, Riker asked Alyssa who she wanted him to get rid of. She gave him a name, Gregory Baker. Riker thought for a few moments before replying that severing ties with the Baker family would be a considerable loss. Still, she seemed to know exactly who she was asking for that favor, considering she knew the rumors. On the other hand, he thought that perhaps he should be interested in accepting that deal. Alyssa was overjoyed to hear that he agreed to her terms. Phew, that's a relief. However, he had no intention of marrying immediately. She asked why not. The man suggested that they become engaged first, since there was no reason to rush. An engagement agreement should be enough to keep Gregory away. Riker also told her not to worry, because he would make sure she received a generous allowance as his future Grand Duchess. What more could she possibly want? Alyssa replied that she trusted him to handle all the arrangements and preparations, and he should know one thing in advance. She was a very ambitious girl. Riker said he would always keep that in mind. Our protagonist declared that she was pleased they had reached such a successful agreement. Then she asked whether he could finally let go of her hand. Apparently, he had completely forgotten about that little detail and had been crushing her tiny hand the whole time. The Grand Duke hesitated for a few moments. At last, he released her hand, and time itself seemed to slow down for an instant. Alyssa said she could hardly wait for their future endeavors together. Riker replied that he felt the same way. Far away, in a distant kingdom, newspapers fluttered through the air. My goodness, what's happening now? A young newspaper boy shouted the latest headlines. Everyone was talking about the breaking news. The Grand Duke had become engaged to a young lady from a northern noble family, yet no one seemed to know who she was. Some even claimed that he had completely fallen in love with her, lost his mind, and all sorts of other rumors. As an engagement gift, he had even given her Chateau Ludern, designed by the architect Brennan Leon. It was such a luxurious estate that it even had its own golden hall. On top of that, it was a strategic fortress located between the imperial capital and the southern region of the empire. That same day, someone was training intensely. Alyssa was drenched in sweat, thinking that all the training in the world would never be enough to make her strong again without mana stones. Just behind her, someone came running. Harry, her older brother, was holding a newspaper. He pointed to an article announcing that Alyssa Lane had been named the Empire's Grand Duchess. The illustration showed only Riker Tessin from behind. Alyssa asked someone whether the rumors had already reached the north. She took the newspaper from Harry's hands, impressed that the Grand Duke had kept his word. What truly shocked her, however, was that the news was only about him, even though she was the main character. Her brother asked what she had been doing so far from the monastery, since she had lied to him by saying she was going there to pray. She admitted to Harry that she had lied because she knew she was under confinement and they would never have allowed her to leave. Looking at the newspaper again, Alyssa tried to change the subject by saying that a new mine had been discovered during an expedition and that investors were now being sought. Harry quickly snatched the newspaper out of his sister's hands. The worried young man told her to stop reading the news. Alyssa replied that he had brought the newspaper specifically for her to read, hadn't he? Harry asked what had happened to his sweet little sister. Then our protagonist heard the sound of someone approaching. One of the butlers arrived with a white horse, announcing that Lady Alyssa's mount was ready. The siblings remained silent for a few moments. The girl was delighted that it hadn't taken long, but Harry revealed that Alyssa had never ridden a horse in her entire life. She happily ran toward the beautiful animal. With the agility of an acrobat, Alyssa leaped onto the horse. The poor horse looked completely confused as well. With a big smile, she confessed to Harry that she had learned how to ride. However, she didn't tell her brother where she had learned those skills. Harry held himself back as he watched his sister gallop away. Suddenly, the horse came to a stop. Alyssa looked to the side because something had caught her attention. She told her brother that apparently someone was looking for him. One of the household butlers came running in panic while calling out Harry's name. The man said that Harry needed to return to the main house immediately. The confused young nobleman asked what had happened. He glanced awkwardly to the side, unsure of how to handle the situation. The butler whispered that he couldn't discuss it there and insisted that Harry accompany him back to the house. The blonde young man apologized to his sister, saying she would have to continue her ride alone, and asked her to stay out of trouble. Alyssa smiled and waved goodbye to her brother. Harry hurried off, leaving the young woman by herself. Alyssa seemed rather pleased despite the unexpected interruption. She urged the horse to continue galloping. The girl took a deep breath, then slowly exhaled. "That's our girl." Woohoo! The horse made a graceful leap. She remembered how grateful she had been to the maids who had treated her broken ankle. Alyssa's body still seemed to remember many of the movements. However, no matter how hard she trained or tried to regain her strength, her physical limits remained painfully obvious. She made a tremendous leap and grabbed onto a very high branch. Our protagonist seemed quite pleased with her landing. Wow! Alyssa really was incredibly skilled. However, the moment she stepped onto the next branch, it began to crack. Oh no! Our protagonist managed to jump away, but fortunately she caught herself on the tree. She sadly remembered what she missed the most ever since returning from the underworld. Oh heavens, her hand slipped. Alyssa fell to the ground with a loud crash. She missed her mana stones terribly. Lying among the fallen leaves, she reflected on how this kind of training was only partially useful. The strength she had gained from the mana stones could never be recovered through physical exercise alone. Suddenly, someone approached. Alyssa looked closely to see who it was. Riker Tessin asked the girl whether everyone in her family was as strange as she was. Our protagonist rolled awkwardly to the side. She looked completely surprised to see the Grand Duke again. The girl asked what he was doing there. Riker extended a hand to help her up and explained that he had come for a business meeting. However, something unusual about the man caught Alyssa's attention. Their fingertips lightly brushed against each other. How cute! Alyssa noticed something that would change her life forever. The Grand Duke's cufflink concealed a special secret. Riker impatiently asked what Alyssa was still standing there for. Without taking his hand, our protagonist quickly got to her feet, stepped away from him, and simply replied that she had just been exercising. He commented that this unusual style of training could be very useful for Tessin's cavalry. At that point, Alyssa asked if they could please change the subject. Riker asked whether he could at least remove the leaves from her hair. But the girl simply stepped back, avoiding his touch as much as possible. Alyssa began moving around in a rather chaotic manner, leaving the man disappointed by her behavior. Finally, he reached toward her hair to remove the leaf that had been bothering him. He gently brushed it away. Riker said that everything was fine now. The Grand Duke noticed Alyssa staring intently at his wrist and asked what she was looking at. She stood on her tiptoes to get a better look, and he asked what she was doing. Suddenly, he lost his footing and began to fall. Alyssa fell straight into Riker's arms. Our protagonist thought she must have been mistaken, but now that she was holding his hands, she was certain. Riker asked her to let go of his hand. He wanted to move away from her, but if he pushed her aside, she would surely get hurt. Alyssa mentioned his cufflinks. To the Grand Duke's surprise, the girl asked if she could have them. Our protagonist was certain they were made from mana stones. Riker looked at her without saying a word. The man replied that unfortunately, he couldn't give her those cufflinks. Those jewels were a family heirloom that had been passed down through generations of the Grand Dukes of Tessin. Alyssa asked if that was really true, while the little voice in her head told her to steal them when he wasn't looking. Haha. What a little troublemaker. Then Riker asked the young woman to get off him already. Alyssa apologized, and he brushed the dust off his coat with a few pats. The Grand Duke stood up and explained that although he couldn't give her those particular cufflinks, he was certain there were similar designs, and he would send her one as a gift. Alyssa was absolutely delighted to hear that. He explained that he couldn't promise anything, but he would do his best. The girl was already happy just knowing that similar ones might exist. Our protagonist insisted on accompanying him during his walk, now much happier after learning that mana stones apparently existed in Tessin. Then the girl offered to repay the gift with a prophecy about the future. Riker was completely surprised when she revealed that there would be no snow that winter. Alyssa continued her prophecy, declaring that he would face an unexpected blizzard during the last week of March, lasting into early April. If a blizzard struck at the end of March, many people in the villages would suffer, and he needed to prepare for it. Alyssa graciously explained that this prophecy was a gift and did not count toward their agreement of 4 prophecies per year. The Grand Duke looked at her with a serious expression. The girl's confidence made her prophecy sound completely believable. The man thanked her for the unusual gift and admitted that thanks to her warning, he might be able to reduce the damage the people of Tessin would suffer. Alyssa replied that she was happy to help him. Meanwhile, every servant in the palace silently watched as the two of them arrived. Daisy welcomed the couple. Roderick handed Riker a small ornate box. What could possibly be inside that box? Let's hope it isn't another one of those clocks. The Grand Duke approached Alyssa and said he had something to tell her. One of the butlers informed the nobleman that Lord Felix Lane was waiting for him in the entrance hall of the main house. Alyssa asked whether he intended to reveal that he had come specifically to see her. The Grand Duke informed the butler that he had indeed come there specifically to visit Lady Alyssa. With a piercing gaze, he ordered every servant to leave them alone. Everyone obeyed immediately. The truth was, perhaps no one would have dared defy him. Among the servants, Daisy heard her name being called. Alyssa whispered to the maid, asking her to return her horse to the stables. She nodded. Daisy truly was very kind. Then Riker asked whether Alyssa was finally finished. Suddenly, our girl turned around so quickly, perhaps she had forgotten that the Grand Duke was still standing right behind her. He opened the box, saying that he was pleased to finally present this gift to her. Inside the box, something shimmered softly. Nestled inside was a beautiful choker, accompanied by a matching pair of earrings, all crafted from the purest ruby in the Empire. Our protagonist was utterly amazed. Wow, all of that? For her? He explained that the ruby had once belonged to an important Marchioness of Tessin, and had long been inseparable from the county of Everlands. The delicate earrings perfectly matched the necklace and were exquisitely crafted. Riker explained that she should observe the highest standards of etiquette whenever she wore them, as the future Grand Duchess of Everlands. Alyssa declared that she would honor his words. The Grand Duke smiled for the first time and asked whether it really required that much determination. The girl replied that it absolutely did. Wow, was he actually smiling? There's a first time for everything. He noticed that she had an unexpectedly adorable side, though he kept that thought to himself. Then he asked her how much she knew about the current imperial family. Alyssa found it strange that he was testing her like this, and replied that the late emperor had 5 princes, one of whom was Riker Tessin, who had been appointed Grand Duke, as well as 1 imperial princess. Among the imperial children, the second eldest, Luke Tessin, had died in an accident 7 years earlier. The ones who remained were the 3rd prince, Lennox the 4th prince, Stephen, and finally Riker Tessin, the 5th prince. Besides them, there was Princess Louise, who ruled over Lirin and was his full sister. From what he had heard, the Grand Duke judged that Alyssa's knowledge was sufficient. She explained that although she might not look like it, she was an avid reader. Riker informed her that he would arrange a tutor for her to learn everything else. Now, regarding her peculiar exercises while standing on a horse's saddle, he thought it would be best if she kept those hidden. Sometime later, Riker bid Alyssa farewell, saying that he looked forward to seeing her at the upcoming ceremony. She told him that she would let him know the color of her dress, so they could match their outfits. Suddenly, he bent down and moved very close to the girl. Wow, they're awfully close. He whispered something into her ear. All right, now I'm really curious. Looking concerned, Alyssa asked whether he was certain about what he was saying. Riker admitted that he was certain because he had seen it with his own eyes. The white horse pawed the ground with one of its hooves. The Grand Duke said he hoped that information would be useful to her. Alyssa watched him leave beneath the setting sun, and before long, he was gone. As she turned to leave, Alyssa thought about how much his visit had caught her by surprise. Still, he seemed to be a much warmer person than she had expected. The moment she turned around, every servant rushed toward her. Everyone wanted to know what the Grand Duke had whispered to her. What a bunch of gossips. While one of the maids asked whether she was all right, another repeatedly demanded to know what the nobleman had whispered. Our protagonist became thoroughly annoyed by everyone's curiosity. Didn't they have anything better to do? How dare they meddle in something that concerned only her? Alyssa shouted for everyone to leave except Daisy. The flames of fury practically surrounded our girl. At last, everyone left, and only Daisy remained, waiting for instructions. She asked whether she should prepare some tea for Alyssa now that her training was finished. Alyssa explained to the maid that she had many things she needed to do, and for that she needed Daisy's help. Then our protagonist instructed the girl to prepare everything for their immediate departure. They were going to Everlands. The memory of the Grand Duke leaning close to her returned like a pleasant dream. So adorable, wasn't it? But even that moment had hidden meaning. Riker had quietly confessed to the girl that her father, Marquis Lane, would be unable to return to the mansion for quite some time. The truth was that Alyssa's father had fallen out of the Emperor's favor after opposing the imperial decree that annulled his only daughter's engagement to Gregory Baker. Because of that, he was now confined within the imperial palace until further notice. Riker also confided that if there was anything Alyssa intended to do, Now was the perfect opportunity. With a bright smile, she declared that her first choice was to get out of there. Massive chains descended rapidly. Someone shouted for the gates to be opened for an elegant carriage approaching the castle. Someone hurried down the staircase, asking who had arrived and what all the commotion was about. Harry awkwardly tried to straighten his coat, while Lady Lane reminded her son to be careful as he hurried downstairs. Felix Lane asked his mother whether she knew anything about what was happening. The lady looked rather confused. She replied that she hadn't been informed of anything. She explained that her husband usually notified everyone in advance whenever he was returning because he refused to arrive unless everyone was ready to greet him. Harry suddenly remembered one tiny detail. Where was Alyssa after all? Right, where could she have gone? The three of them stared at one another for a few moments. Suddenly, the entrance hall doors were flung open. The servants had lined up to welcome Marquis Lane home, but he wasn't interested in any of that. He kept shouting only one name, Alyssa. The furious man repeatedly called for his daughter, demanding that she show herself immediately. He shouted at the servants, demanding to know where she was and why she hadn't come to the entrance hall. The Marquis clenched his teeth. How dare she fail to appear to greet her own father? The servants looked completely bewildered by both the Marquis's sudden arrival and his overwhelming fury. Before one of the servants could assist him, the cruel man shoved the young servant aside. What a brute. He grabbed the handle of his daughter's bedroom door, then he threw the door wide open while shouting for her. However, Alyssa's room was dark and completely silent. There wasn't a single sign of the girl. Felix stepped forward, trying to explain that people were already searching for his sister. The Marquis looked at his eldest son in utter disbelief. The only daughter in a household full of people had simply disappeared, and they expected him to believe that no one knew where she was. Suddenly, in the middle of the crowd, someone announced that Alyssa had gone to Everlands. The Marquis demanded to know who had said that. Someone wearing a yellow dress stepped forward through the crowd. It was his wife who revealed Alyssa's supposed whereabouts. Lady Lane answered with a smile that her daughter had gone to Everlands. Sometime later, in a private room, the Marquis asked his wife what had actually happened. His wife confessed that their daughter had left behind a letter, explaining that now that Alyssa had received a title and her own domain, she wanted to visit her new territory. The Marquis exclaimed, "What nonsense is this?" He rudely told his wife that she should have stopped Alyssa from running away. Lady Lane, as sharp as ever, asked how exactly he expected her to have done that. She explained that she could never have stopped Alyssa because she could barely even see her daughter, since both of them had been confined under the Marquis's own orders. The man was stunned by her answer. He asked why his wife, Marcella Lane, was behaving so childishly over something so trivial. The woman simply replied that she was telling him the truth and had no idea what he was talking about. The Marquis remained silent for a while. Lady Lane pointed out that throughout all 17 years of Alyssa's life, she had never once claimed she was incapable of doing something. Sometime earlier, Daisy had arrived carrying a letter. It was the very first time Alyssa had called her mother and asked for a great favor. She needed to escape the mansion, and she needed her mother to buy her some time. Returning to the present, Lady Lane said she was tired and wanted her husband to put an end to the conversation. She told him that their children were not tools for him to use whenever it suited him, and that he should stop treating them that way. The Marquis replied, "That's enough," and declared that he would leave her alone. He firmly stated that as long as she bore the name of a noble house, it was her duty as his wife to serve the interests of the family. As for Alyssa, he would send people to bring her back from Everlands. Before leaving, he informed her that once their daughter returned, she would once again be allowed to walk freely through the palace as she had before. Lady Lane listened as her husband slammed the door behind him. She let out a sigh of relief and hoped she had bought Alyssa enough time. Had she already reached her destination? Far away, somewhere else, two butlers grasped the ornate handles of another palace's great doors. They opened the heavy doors in perfect unison. A line of maids, together with their head maid, welcomed Lady Alyssa. Wow, our protagonist looked absolutely beautiful in that pink and white dress. She seemed amazed by such a warm reception. The head maid introduced herself as Violet and declared that she would serve as Alyssa's personal tutor in imperial etiquette and her new life as the Grand Duchess. Our protagonist thanked her for her kindness, admitting that she had never expected such an extravagant welcome after arriving on such short notice. Petunia explained that the Grand Duke had personally informed them of the importance of Lady Alyssa's arrival. As a result, the young lady's chambers had already been prepared so she could rest after her exhausting journey. She explained that, from that moment onward, Annie would be responsible for attending to Lady Alyssa's every need. The young maid politely asked Alyssa to follow her so she could show her to her room. The two young women exchanged warm smiles, but Daisy remained silent. What could possibly be bothering her? Annie cheerfully explained that everyone had been eagerly awaiting Lady Alyssa's arrival. Everyone had done their very best to ensure the palace would feel comfortable enough for her to truly feel at home. The girl pulled open the large door handle. Finally, she led Alyssa into the elegant room, decorated with delicate white walls and countless ornate details. Our protagonist was deeply impressed. She thought everything was perfect. Annie was delighted that she liked everything and informed her that she would leave her to rest. Alyssa was amazed by it all because this palace had been the final masterpiece of the architect Brennan Lyon. It truly lived up to its legendary reputation. Daisy called out to her mistress, saying that she thought they were supposed to be going to Everlands, but instead, they had come to the imperial capital, a magnificent city filled with impressive buildings, elegantly dressed people walking the streets, and a vibrant atmosphere. Alyssa simply replied that the ceremony would be taking place very soon, so how could they possibly travel all the way to Everlands and return in time? With a sweet smile, she asked Daisy whether she would like to go shopping with her. The maid looked completely bewildered by the invitation. "Come on, Daisy. A little shopping never hurt anyone." Alyssa replied that they deserved to have a little fun since they had made it all the way to the capital. The two of them arrived at an elegant boutique filled with refined fragrances and luxurious perfumes. Alyssa remembered the rumors that Karen's perfumes were exceptionally extravagant, and even the bottles themselves were exquisitely refined. She remembered how her past self could never have imagined being in the imperial capital, let alone inside such an elegant perfume boutique. The girl asked to sample one of the fragrances, and one of the attendants replied that she would prepare a sample for her immediately. The attendant skillfully placed a few drops onto a scented paper strip. Alyssa smelled the perfumed paper. Someone approached, the sound of their shoes clicking against the wooden floor. The girl opened her eyes to see who it was. The red-haired woman introduced herself as Karen, the owner of the perfume boutique. She was a prodigy of the Western Empire. Alyssa knew that, in the future, Karen would become incredibly famous, and her business would flourish. Before long, Karen would become a sensation throughout the empire. Soon, every fragrance trend would be dictated by her. She explained that since Alyssa had been the very first person to try that fragrance, she was curious to know whether the girl liked it. Our protagonist knew that Karen would soon create a famous perfume collection that would captivate the entire empire. Because of that, it would be wise for Alyssa to secure her as an ally. She thought the fragrance was delicate and wonderful. The way its intensity changed according to the wearer's body made the fragrance truly unique, as though it had been carefully crafted specifically for each individual. Karen was delighted that Alyssa had noticed that detail. Alyssa said she was very happy to become friends with someone so talented. Karen replied that it would be a true honor for her. Our protagonist declared that she would purchase an entire bottle of that fragrance. Karen revealed that she would love to invite Alyssa to her estate soon to try more fragrances. Alyssa said she would gladly accept the invitation. The perfumer cursed and said it would be an honor to welcome her. Our protagonist walked through the streets of the imperial capital. Outside on the street, Daisy quietly admitted to Alyssa that she had no idea she knew so much about perfumes. Alyssa replied that she only knew a thing or two. The sweet fragrance remained etched in her memory. She had merely mentioned things that sounded right based on the quality of the perfume she had been offered. After all, people in the capital looked down on anyone who appeared ignorant. Alyssa asked Daisy whether she had sounded convincing. The maid replied that she had sounded like someone who had studied perfumes her entire life. Our protagonist smiled and told the girl they still had several more places to visit. She chose a beautiful yellow dress for the ceremony. In addition, Alyssa picked a lovely pair of matching earrings. Our protagonist chose even more jewelry that perfectly complemented her. She found a beautiful pink fan to complete her look. More and more little gifts. Shopping really was wonderful. That shopping spree left every shopkeeper in the capital delighted, and they could hardly wait for Alyssa's next visit. Daisy was already exhausted. Alyssa asked whether she was tired, but the maid denied it. Our protagonist asked her to hold on just a little longer. When they arrived at a modest house, Alyssa told Daisy that it would be the last place they visited that day. Inside the house, a craftsman was smoothing the sole of a leather shoe. The man asked whether he could help them with anything. Alyssa replied that she had come to commission some embroidery. The man explained that the embroidery shop was on the second floor of the house. He called for a young woman named Jordana, telling her that a customer had arrived. The young woman, dressed elegantly in green and cream, quickly came downstairs. With a warm smile, she invited Alyssa and Daisy to come upstairs and see her workshop. The two waited while Jordana prepared tea for them, apologizing for the mess in her studio. She explained that if she had known customers would be coming that day, she certainly would have cleaned up better. Alyssa assured her that it wasn't a problem, and that Jordana's shop looked lovely. She served the tea while thanking Alyssa for the compliment. The shop owner introduced herself as Jordana Pearl, though they could call her Jody. She apologized once again, saying that she might not know all the proper imperial etiquette required to receive someone so important. Alyssa introduced herself and explained that she had heard many compliments about Jordana's embroidery and sewing work, so surely she accepted private commissions, didn't she? Blushing slightly, Jody replied that she wasn't sure she was good enough for people to be spreading rumors about her. Alyssa asked Daisy to hand over the designs. She passed several drawings to Jody and asked whether she could take a look at them. The seamstress asked whether she should follow the designs exactly as they were. She examined the sheets until one mysterious drawing caught her attention. Alyssa asked Daisy to leave the two of them alone for a moment. Jody gripped the papers tightly, crumpling them in her hands. Alyssa explained to the seamstress that only the two of them knew the secret, and that she had gone to great lengths to ensure no one would discover she was there. Alyssa said that Daisy had become very tired, especially without understanding what was going on. Jody gripped a pair of scissors tightly. Oh my god, what was about to happen? Our protagonist asked whether the craftsman downstairs also made women's shoes, because she wanted to reward Daisy for walking around so much. Suddenly, Jody lunged at Alyssa, demanding to know who on earth she really was. Our confident protagonist tossed her fan into the air, saying that she was currently the most famous person in the capital. But before Jody could strike her with the scissors, Alyssa used her fan to deflect the attack. Finally, she revealed that she knew Jordana Pearl belonged to the largest information syndicate in the Empire. Jody asked how Alyssa could possibly be so strong. Our protagonist revealed that she wanted to become her friend. Wow, what a plot twist. That was the symbol of the Krona clan. Jody held her injured hand while listening to Alyssa explain that the clan was led by 6 leaders, including a Grand Master. That fact was common knowledge among the people. However, the seamstress remembered that she had hidden a blade inside a basket. Before she could react, Alyssa began telling the story of 6 farms that had all been burned down simultaneously. Why did that information shock her so much? Jody remembered that incident making headlines in the newspapers. How could Alyssa possibly know that the families who had been attacked were members of the Krona clan's council? Someone was desperately running through a forest. Jordana, still just a child, begged someone to let her go. Her parents had been left behind. Oh no, what was happening? A man, was he the craftsman from the shop downstairs, ran away from the danger, saying it was already too late for them. Jody had to survive. It was the only way she could one day do something about it. The little girl watched her home burst into flames. Suddenly, the fire spread and completely engulfed the estate. What a tragedy. Moments later, everything collapsed. Jody cried endlessly, especially because she knew the fire had left no survivors. However, the body of the family's youngest daughter had never been found. Back in the present, Jordana grabbed a blade hidden inside a basket and ordered Alyssa to shut up. The seamstress demanded that the girl leave immediately. Then she declared that the Krona clan no longer existed. Alyssa firmly replied that would only be true if she continued running away. Those words stunned Jody. How dare Alyssa say something like that? What did she possibly know about their history? Then came the revelation. Our protagonist knew who had betrayed the Krona clan. Alyssa pushed the blade aside with her fan and repeated that she knew the identity of the clan's true traitor. She promised Jordana that she would help her get her revenge. The seamstress asked why she would ever help her. The girl opened her fan and explained that she hoped she and Jordana Pearl could become friends. Alyssa believed that such an alliance would benefit both of them. She stepped closer to the seamstress and explained that publicly everyone believed the Krona clan was ruled by the 6 members of its council. But in reality, there was another council known only to the Grand Master. It was called the Krona Hexagon. Those 6 hidden members were the true traitors of the original clan. Jody asked whether Alyssa was truly telling the truth. Alyssa explained that she would have to discover the truth for herself, because after everything, Jody would become the clan's new Grand Master. Our protagonist advised that it would be wise for Jordana and her family to leave that place as quickly as possible, otherwise she might end up in danger before she ever had the chance to take her revenge. Jody asked whether her hiding place had already been discovered. Alyssa realized that quite a bit of time had passed since she had arrived. Our protagonist requested that her commission be completed by spring, assuming Jody survived until then. If she ever needed anything, she could find Alyssa at Chateau Ludern. And just like that, she left. Even though the seamstress still had countless questions. Oh no, what would Jody do now? Was Alyssa simply a crazy woman? Downstairs, Daisy patiently waited for her mistress. Jordana wondered what on earth had just happened. What kind of madness was that? Inside a hidden shelter, 2 twin girls asked whether everything was all right and whether it was finally safe for them to come out. The blonde young woman apologized to the children, explaining that she had taken longer than expected. The 2 girls replied that everything was fine and that they had enjoyed themselves while waiting. She asked Flora, one of the twins, to go call their uncle. Jody told the children that they would soon be setting out on another journey. However, one of them, Amelie, looked very sad. The seamstress noticed immediately and became concerned. She knelt down and gently asked the little girl whether she wanted to stay there instead. Amelie replied that wasn't the reason. If they stayed, they would all be in danger. Jody sadly admitted that they had to move once again, but she promised that this would be the very last time. Amelie brightened up and asked whether, this time, they wouldn't have to leave without saying goodbye to her friends. The blonde young woman promised that they wouldn't. Once everything was over, they would never have to move again. The craftsman working downstairs asked whether Jody had finally made up her mind. He was her Uncle Brandon, the twins' father, the very man who had saved Jody from the fire. Jody admitted that she had hoped he would become the new Grand Master of the clan. But he simply replied that she already knew what he was going to say. He was nothing more than a shoemaker. Jody asked whether he truly believed she was capable of doing it. Her uncle took his niece's hands and told her that she was capable of anything, no matter what decision she made. He wanted her to remember that they would always stand by her side. Those words filled Jordana with happiness. She needed to act quickly because there was a very important commission that had to be finished before spring. Back at Chateau Luderon, Annie walked calmly down the corridor. Another maid announced the arrival of the pink-haired girl. Annie apologized for the interruption but explained that she needed Alyssa's attention for just a moment. Petunia said that the dance lessons had already ended and that she would leave the 2 of them alone. Alyssa invited Annie to come closer. Annie explained that the invitation to the upcoming ceremony at the palace had arrived. However, surprisingly, another letter had arrived as well. Alyssa looked completely confused. Who could possibly have sent the second letter? Far away from there, at the Imperial Palace, Grand Duke Riker of Tessin was announced before the Emperor. Riker sat across from the monarch and asked whether he had read the request he had submitted. The emperor asked whether it concerned the reinforcements along the western frontier. The blonde-haired man replied that it was quite a request, especially with such a short deadline. It was Riker's older brother, the current emperor Leonard Tessin, who asked whether he didn't already have enough soldiers. The Grand Duke declared that the emperor already knew how limited Tessin's forces were. At that very moment, the northern tribes were running out of food, which would likely drive them to attack the villages. Leonard countered by saying that Tessin already possessed sufficient forces, and sending additional soldiers would create problems with the other noble houses. He explained that although they were brothers, there were certain things even he couldn't do. Riker stated that several recent military movements had appeared highly suspicious. Leonard looked at him without saying another word. He asked his younger brother whether he was absolutely certain about what he was saying. The Grand Duke replied that he had received Roderick's reports. Leonard declared that if Roderick had reported it, then there was a very high chance it was true. The Emperor hesitated for a few moments before speaking. At last, Leonard announced that he would approve his brother's request. The Grand Duke solemnly thanked him. He certainly hoped Riker appreciated it. The Emperor remarked that Riker had no idea how much the other noble houses would be complaining to him over the coming days because of that decision, as though the last few days hadn't already been exhausting enough while everyone prepared for the upcoming ceremony. Because of all the chaos, he and Empress Eleanor had argued terribly and had been sleeping in separate bedrooms for weeks. Riker asked whether Her Majesty was truly that upset. Leonard explained that the preparations had been exhausting for Eleanor as well because the entire capital wanted to know who the future Grand Duchess of Tessin would be, and countless young ladies kept trying to obtain information through the Empress. He declared that it was all Riker's fault. Well, brothers will always be brothers no matter where they are, won't they? The Emperor admitted that it hadn't been easy trying to calm his wife while the two of them continued sleeping in separate rooms. Leonard took the opportunity to ask how the future Grand Duchess of Tessin was doing. However, Riker simply replied that she had not yet officially been appointed. Apparently, Alyssa was adapting well to her new life at Chateau Luderne. The exhausted Emperor replied that wasn't what he had asked. Leonard ordered that the moment Alyssa turned 18, they were to be married immediately. Going back in time, Marquis Lane stood before the Emperor, who explained that he understood the Marquise's concerns regarding the girl's age. Leonard stated that he had never intended for her to marry so soon. However, considering that she was already 17, once she turned 19, it would be the perfect age for marriage. He believed that 2 years would give her enough time to mature, and would also allow the Marquis to prepare himself to give his youngest daughter away in marriage. Didn't that sound like a reasonable plan? The Emperor asked sarcastically why the Marquis looked so gloomy. After all, was the Marquis opposed to joining the imperial family? The man nervously replied that he was honored by the opportunity that had been granted to him. Leonard Tessin said, "Very well, that's what I thought." He could hardly wait for the future. Back in the present, the older brother tried to justify himself by saying that he had been manipulating Marquis Lane. Riker replied that the matter had already been settled and that the imperial family should keep its word. Leonard quickly stood up, slamming his hand on the table, accusing Riker of handing Everlands away on a silver platter. Once Alyssa received Everlands as a gift, not even the Emperor would be able to take it back. Riker said he already knew all of that. Leonard asked whether he was so deeply in love with the girl that he no longer listened to his older brother's advice. The Grand Duke replied that she was someone whose value surpassed even the loss of Everlands.
Wow, how sweet. Our protagonist truly was a very special girl.
He mentioned that Leonard should stop wasting time on that matter and instead deal with the rumors spreading throughout the capital. Some people were even claiming that he had kidnapped Lady Alyssa. Leonard nervously admitted that perhaps it was all because of Riker's terrible reputation, since he himself had only tried to spread romantic stories. Considering the Grand Duke's past, that was rather difficult to believe. Riker remained silent for a few moments, staring at his older brother. The Emperor looked somewhat uneasy. Finally, the Grand Duke decided it was time to leave. But before he departed, Leonard had something he wanted to tell him. He asked his brother to be careful because another moon ritual would soon take place, once winter ended and the new year began. Riker remained silent after hearing Leonard's words. Then he left, leaving the Emperor alone inside the Grand Office. Leonard leaned his head back. He looked deeply lost in thought. As he walked through the palace, Riker wondered what his brother had to do with that matter. Standing behind one of the pillars, Henrik asked whether the Grand Duke had managed to obtain what he wanted. Riker told the butler that the Emperor had agreed to send additional soldiers to Tessin. Henrik felt relieved because they would now be able to protect the future lady of the house more effectively. The Grand Duke pointed out that the future lady of the house was only a 17-year-old girl. Henrik argued that someone brave enough to send him a letter directly and propose marriage certainly wasn't an ordinary girl. Furthermore, she would turn 18 the following year, just after summer. That would be the perfect age for marriage. Henrik asked whether the Emperor also believed it would be a good idea for them to marry once she turned 18. Riker looked suspiciously at the butler and asked whether he had become one of the Emperor's spies as well. The butler explained that Emperor Leonard had wanted his younger brother to marry for a very long time. Riker replied that there were only 2 years between Alyssa and Josephine, his niece. Henrik pointed out that even Lady Josephine was already engaged, while Riker was falling behind. The Grand Duke ordered him to drop the subject. After all, he had no intention of truly marrying Alyssa. That's shocking. We never saw that coming. Suddenly our girl appeared, calling out to the Grand Duke. The two men were stunned by Alyssa's unexpected arrival. Riker was left speechless when he saw her standing there. Alyssa explained that she had noticed the Tessin crest on the carriage and wondered whether he might be nearby. She said she was happy to see him again after so long. What a beautiful smile she has. Alyssa remained silent as she admired the Grand Duke's elegant carriage. Riker became extremely nervous. Had the girl overheard what he had just said? He had only moments earlier told Hendrik that he had no intention of truly marrying Alyssa. She asked whether everything was all right with him. After all, he had suddenly become so quiet. The man let out a sigh of relief and replied that it was nothing. Riker simply explained that he hadn't expected to run into her there. After all, what was the young lady doing at the Imperial Palace? Our protagonist revealed that she had been summoned by the Emperor himself. He had sent her a letter requesting a meeting before the ceremony. The Grand Duke remembered that his brother, the Emperor, had ordered him to have Alyssa sign the marriage contract as soon as possible. He asked whether Alyssa remembered the cufflinks she had liked so much. Riker said that he would give them to her if he found another similar pair. The man revealed that he had discovered another jewel at his residence in the capital. The girl was absolutely thrilled by the Grand Duke's invitation. At last, Alyssa would recover another mana stone, and she would even get to visit the home of her future husband. Sometime later, they arrived at the Tessin residence, an elegant mansion decorated in shades of green and cream. Riker opened a delicate jewelry box, explaining that the family's artisans were delighted to finally receive some new commissions. Alyssa was completely amazed by the brilliance of her gift. Wow! It really must have been something extraordinary. Even the jewelry box itself was adorned with brilliant, refined details. The truth was that our protagonist hadn't expected anything like this, since she never imagined she would find mana stones on the surface. That jewel was the largest mana stone Alyssa had ever seen in her entire life. Oh my! Even the tiny crystals surrounding it were mana stones. The Grand Duke asked whether Alyssa liked the gift. The girl was still far too amazed to answer. She said that apparently the rumors about Tessin were true. Diamonds floated in the streams, and precious gemstones appeared spontaneously on the ground. Alyssa told him that the gift was magnificent. What she truly wanted was to devour it immediately and absorb its magical power. The girl was surprised when Riker revealed that there really was gold dust in a river within the Marsh Valley, though not nearly as much as the rumors claimed. To find it, someone had to know the terrain extremely well because the gold settled at the bottom and required special tools to collect. Alyssa was amazed that the rumors were true, at least to some extent. A place where gold could be found in the rivers, and diamond mines sparkled throughout the mountains. For a land known as the Land of Death, Tessin seemed more like paradise. Our protagonist became incredibly excited about visiting Tessin someday. Soon afterward, servants arrived carrying tea and a selection of light refreshments. While sipping a cup of tea, Riker explained that he would return to Tessin immediately after the ceremony ended. There would be a banquet right after the ceremony, leaving them with no opportunity to talk. Oh, what a shame. Because of that, Riker wanted to say goodbye to her in advance. Alyssa looked completely confused by that statement. She knew the Grand Duke rarely ever left his territory, but why did he have to return so quickly, especially when his fiancée was so close by? She asked whether he would return to the capital soon after arriving back in Tessin. Riker explained that he would most likely return at the end of the following spring, and if they needed to communicate, they could exchange letters. Alyssa wasn't happy about that situation at all. Yes, girl. That's not right. The girl asked whether she could accompany him to Tessin. Chateau Luderne was certainly charming, but she would truly love to travel there with him. Riker replied that Alyssa would adapt very well to Chateau Luderne. Once she was completely settled there, she could visit both Everlands and Tessin. Our protagonist grew increasingly irritated. After all, if he didn't want her to come, he could simply say so. She hated it when he danced around the subject. She told him that if he was going to keep acting like that, Alyssa paused for a moment, carefully reconsidering her words. There would be plenty of opportunities to visit Tessin in the future, since they would be married. She decided to let it go this time, behaving like a proper noble young lady. Back in her carriage on the way home, Alyssa told her fiancé that they would probably only see each other again on the official day of the ceremony. She informed him that she would be wearing a deep crimson dress, with her hair flowing loose. The Grand Duke replied that he would keep that in mind. At last, he was left standing alone in front of his residence, and Alyssa's carriage departed. Sometime later, Henrik asked Riker what he intended to wear to the banquet. He simply replied that he would wear one of his old ceremonial uniforms. The butler smiled and pointed out that His Grace couldn't possibly wear his usual uniform. However, the man insisted that he could wear the special formal uniform reserved for important occasions. Henrik suggested that the imperial dressmakers would be delighted to create a new outfit specifically for the ceremony, with a touch of color. At last, the day of the ceremony arrived. The imperial palace was truly magnificent. One elegant carriage after another continued arriving. Inside the palace, Riker asked Alyssa whether she was nervous. The girl admitted that she was. He asked whether she remembered the order of the ceremony. Alyssa explained that she remembered the entrance but had forgotten everything after that. Riker Tessin, dressed in a magnificent crimson military uniform, explained that all she had to do was continue walking until she reached the center of the Grand Hall. He looked straight ahead and assured Alyssa that she had nothing to worry about. The Grand Duke told his fiancée that she was the true star of the ceremony. He gently took her hand so the two of them could enter together. How sweet! It truly was a beautiful moment. As the two of them entered, Alyssa overheard countless compliments. People remarked that she had the face of an innocent angel. Others admired the magnificent rubies adorning her jewelry. Some even claimed that Riker had fallen in love at first sight and kidnapped the girl. But seeing them together now, it was obvious that he was completely smitten with her. A few malicious nobles whispered behind their fans. Alyssa and Riker made an incredibly beautiful couple, and their perfectly coordinated outfits made them look even more stunning. Together, they truly were a feast for the eyes. Our protagonist curtsied before the Emperor and the Empress and declared that it was an honor to stand in their presence. Emperor Leonard Tessin said that it was an honor to meet Lady Alyssa Lane, who was currently more famous in the capital than he was, and invited her to step closer. The nobleman tapped her with his sword, formally naming her the Duchess of Everlands and Tessin, and declared that from that day forward she should devote herself to the greater good of the Empire. Alyssa accepted the honor. He believed it truly was a very special day. The Emperor declared that the realm of Everlands now had a new duchess and that his younger brother was finally engaged. "Welcome to the Imperial family, Alyssa." Everyone applauded as the nobleman congratulated his brother on finding such a wonderful future wife. "Well, let's hope Riker doesn't go back on his promise." Leonard motioned to two butlers carrying a large chest and politely asked the couple to accept his wedding gift. Inside the chest was a delicate white veil adorned with exquisite lace. Riker recognized it immediately, although Alyssa did not. It was the imperial veil, used only during the most important ceremonies and passed down from generation to generation. Apparently, Leonard intended to firmly establish Alyssa's place within the imperial family. Leonard Tessin declared that he could hardly wait for the day Lady Alyssa officially joined the imperial family. But were his intentions truly sincere? Inside the Golden Hall, everyone commented that they had never seen the imperial family make such a proactive gesture. The ladies of the court noticed how quickly Alyssa had been accepted as part of the empire. They remarked that they had never imagined the emperor favored his younger brother so much. Even though the marriage had not yet taken place, Alyssa was already being regarded as the Grand Duchess of Tessin. The Empress called out to her brother-in-law. She revealed that she knew he intended to return to Tessin as soon as the ceremony ended. Leonard called his brother over and said that his wife had something she wished to tell him. Riker explained that he couldn't leave the frontier without protection for very long, so he needed to return as quickly as possible. The gentle Empress said she regretted that the two of them would be separated for so long just before their wedding. So, why not take Alyssa directly to Tessin? Riker asked what she meant by that suggestion. The Emperor thought his wife's idea was splendid. Although it would be a long journey, if the two of them traveled together, it wouldn't be lonely. The assembled subjects applauded their majesty's brilliant idea. Riker glanced around, trying to avoid everyone's attention. The ladies of the court considered it a romantic tragedy for the couple to be separated just before the imperial wedding. Alyssa also looked around to see who was speaking. Our protagonist thought everyone was making far too much of a fuss. The nobles gathered inside the Golden Hall seemed to support the Emperor and Empress's proposal without giving much thought to what Riker and Alyssa themselves actually wanted. The young couple remained silent while listening to the applause of people who didn't even know them. The Grand Duke realized he had no choice. Finally, he turned toward Alyssa so they could leave together. He asked Alyssa, his beloved fiancée, whether she would like to accompany him on his journey back to Tessin. Wow, our girl was completely surprised. With a graceful curtsy, the girl replied that it would be an honor to accompany him on the journey home. The Emperor and Empress applauded once again, and all the assembled subjects celebrated along with them. And that was how Lady Alyssa Lane's departure for the Kingdom of Tessin was officially decided. Everyone was delighted by the announcement. Sometime later, the sound of horses galloping echoed loudly. Several royal guards raced after Lady Alyssa, calling out her name. Meanwhile, she galloped far ahead of them. Yes, girl, a true Amazon. One of the guards called Roderick an idiot because they had been ordered to treat her with the utmost care, knowing she was the only daughter born into House Lane in 200 years. Only a few hours earlier, they had all welcomed her to Tessin and found Alyssa gently petting her horse. The men informed her that they had prepared a carriage for her, but our girl was full of surprises. They had imagined Alyssa as a fragile young lady who had never lifted anything heavier than a spoon. Instead of taking the carriage, she asked whether she could go for a ride on horseback. How could such a delicate lady ride better than the Imperial cavalry? Roderick asked how he could possibly have guessed she would be so skilled. He was terrified. They had to bring her back immediately. Their imperial horses galloped as fast as they could, but it still didn't seem fast enough. Roderick ordered one of the other guards to summon Riker immediately. Oh no! Lady Alyssa had ridden straight into the dark forest. Oh my god! Is she okay? Roderick warned one of the fair-haired guards that the two of them had to do everything possible to catch up with her, because the dark forest lay beyond Tessin's borders. He urged his horse to run even faster. Every second counted. However, the sound of Alyssa's horse's hooves was already beginning to fade into the darkness. Even so, in the distance, Roderick managed to spot a figure that seemed to be the fugitives. At last, he had found Lady Alyssa and her white horse. He quickly approached her, urgently asking her to return because the forest was extremely dangerous. Roderick and the other guard called out to the Duchess, but she remained silent. He approached the girl who stood frozen beside her horse. What was happening? From the expression in the great white stallion's eyes, they could make out the silhouette of a massive predator. Oh no! The beast stepped on a branch, snapping it with a loud crack. That sound seemed strangely familiar. The horse was badly startled and reared up. Roderick bravely drew his sword. "That's it. Go teach them a lesson, boys." The fair-haired knight lowered his spear and told Alyssa to stay away from the danger. Roderick and he would handle the fight. However, to everyone's surprise, those wolves were no ordinary beasts. They were the very same cruel stone wolves that had tormented Alyssa in the underworld. Roderick looked extremely tense as he faced the unexpected battle, and a bead of sweat rolled down his face. The noble knight launched the first attack. The two men charged straight at the stone wolves. Wow. Now that's some action. Get them, boys. Roderick tried to strike the beasts with his sword. The other young knight joined the battle. He thrust his spear into one of the wolves. The blade created a crack in the stone, and a gentle golden light began to shine. However, the knight tried to pull the weapon free without success. He finally realized that his spear was stuck. Roderick noticed that his companion might be in serious danger. The stone beasts began surrounding the fair-haired knight. "Oh no! I hope everything turns out all right. Where were the reinforcements?" He tried to defend himself from one of the wolf's attacks, but with a powerful swipe of its paw, the beast knocked his spear away before he could react. His spear flew through the air. It finally landed at Alyssa's feet, well away from the battle. The young knight shouted for Lady Alyssa to protect herself. "Help!" She noticed that the spear was a well-crafted, high-quality weapon. As one of the wolves approached from behind her, our protagonist politely asked whether she could borrow the spear for just a few seconds. The beast opened its massive jaws to attack Alyssa. The blades forged in the capital were made from the finest silver. The fair-haired guard warned Alyssa about the incoming attack, but before anything could happen, she was already gone. To everyone's astonishment, Alyssa performed an acrobatic leap over the stone wolf. Then she landed squarely on top of its snout. "That's it, girl." She explained to the men that the wolves were made of stone, making it impossible to cut straight through them. Careless attacks would only damage their weapons. Leaping once again, Alyssa explained that they should strike other parts of the creatures instead. That way they would succeed. The enormous beast opened its mouth, revealing its terrifying razor-sharp fangs. Alyssa used the spear exactly as she had explained. Her strike created another crack, glowing with brilliant golden light. Our protagonist landed gracefully on the ground, looking quite pleased with herself. She asked the guards to gather the black stones once the battle was over. Roderick asked, for heaven's sake, what she was talking about. Meanwhile, even more creatures came charging toward them. Alyssa explained that stone wolves, just like real wolves, lived in large packs. The two knightly guards prepared themselves for the counterattack. The girl reminded them that Daisy was waiting for her, so they had better finish everything quickly. The beasts charged directly at the humans. Roderick attacked one of the creatures again, this time much wiser. He skillfully wielded his sword. The fair-haired knight aimed directly at one of the glowing cracks in the stone. As Alyssa struck another stone wolf, she felt relieved by how quickly the soldiers had learned. Of course, men trained in Tessin would naturally be highly skilled. Another stone wolf leaped toward her. Oh no, not again. Alyssa believed she would soon eliminate every last one of them, thanks to the many years she had spent training in the underworld. Unlike the others, this beast aimed directly for her spear. Using its massive paw, it snapped the weapon in half. Wow. Now Alyssa was genuinely worried. Apparently the wolves were capable of learning as well. One half of the broken spear flew high into the air. But before all hope was lost, a new warrior joined the battle. The skilled man hurled an axe at incredible speed. The impact struck one of the stone beasts. Alyssa watched in shock as the creature split cleanly in two. The heavy axe landed right beside her. Amid the shower of falling stones, Alyssa discovered the identity of the warrior. Riker Tessin had come to save her. He was breathing heavily from the effort. Wow, that was exactly the twist we had been waiting for. He immediately grabbed her by the shoulders. The Grand Duke asked whether she was all right, but she only stared at him, completely mesmerized. With a smile, Alyssa said she was fine and asked whether there were any more of them. Then she pointed at the large pile of stones left behind by the wolves. Riker said he was relieved that she wasn't hurt, and promised he would tell her more about the forest later. He turned toward Roderick and Oliver, the fair-haired young man. The two immediately introduced themselves, even though they were exhausted from the battle. The Grand Duke demanded to know how the two of them had failed to protect a simple young girl. Roderick was terrified, but Riker said he wouldn't blame them for the Grand Duchess running into the forest. He also ordered everyone to keep absolutely everything they had witnessed there a complete secret. Riker instructed them to clean up the area, return to the castle, and take every single one of the stones with them. A few days later, Alyssa was sitting in her room while Daisy brushed her hair. Our protagonist had mistakenly believed she would be staying in the same castle as Riker, but that wasn't what he had planned. The man ordered her to stay in a smaller, more secure castle located within his estate. Daisy explained that the entire castle would belong to Alyssa once they were married, so she should get used to living there. Alyssa complained that Daisy should be on her side and agree with her. The girl pointed out that it had already been a month since they had arrived in Tessin, yet ever since then she hadn't seen Riker even once. The only thing left for her to deal with was the endless line of carriages arriving at the palace, filled with desperate nobles hoping to catch a glimpse of the Grand Duke's fiancée. One of the butlers announced the arrival of House Greitz. The men quickly stood up to head toward a meeting. The butler led them into the reception room. However, one of the guests decided to slip away. Oh my! Who could it be? The man quietly separated himself from the others without anyone noticing. He hurried down the corridor. He noted that sneaking inside had been the hardest part, and from that point onward, his mission would be much easier. He was a first-class assassin from the Grigan clan. The spy remembered being told that the girl was nothing more than a naive young lady from the Northern Kingdom, and that the palace's internal security was a complete mess. He reached inside his coat, preparing to draw an ornate dagger. To him, this was the perfect opportunity to portray the lord of the castle as a heretic. Suddenly, he realized he was no longer alone. A strange presence filled the air. He quickly turned around to see who had arrived. Before he could react, he was struck. The assassin spy collapsed onto the floor and was no longer a threat. Alyssa picked up the small weapon he had been carrying and casually remarked that they were receiving far too many visitors. Night fell over Tessin, and the smaller palace was peaceful and silent. A window quietly opened under the cover of darkness. Oh no! A mysterious figure slipped into one of the luxurious bedrooms. Who could it be? Alyssa slept peacefully, completely unaware that a stranger was approaching. The sinister spy watched her closely, confirming that she was indeed his target. He slowly raised a sharp blade above his head, but before anything could happen, Alyssa opened her eyes. The spy was utterly startled. The spear was knocked out of his hand. The dagger spun wildly through the bedroom. Our skilled protagonist effortlessly caught the weapon and asked whether he knew how many nighttime visitors she had received so far. She turned as she climbed out of bed, explaining that she didn't mind visitors. Alyssa asked whether it was really necessary to wake her up for something like this. Our girl even had a sense of humor in the most dangerous situations. The spy looked thoroughly confused, but he still managed to draw another blade he had hidden. He narrowed his eyes and asked whether Alyssa truly intended to make things difficult. The man admitted that he had been wondering why none of his previous spies had ever returned. After all, who would have guessed that the Grand Duchess was a monster? Outside, someone climbed onto the balcony. Two mysterious figures quietly approached without the masked man noticing. The ruthless assassin asked Alyssa whether she knew how many elite assassins he had been forced to hire just to deal with her. He declared that she wouldn't stand a chance this time. But before he could make his move, someone attacked him. A mysterious figure stood behind him. Alyssa looked slightly startled. After all, who were these new visitors? One of them said that fortunately, they had arrived at exactly the right moment that night. The young woman removed her mask. It was Jordana Pearl, the seamstress in disguise, who had become the Grand Master of the Chroma clan. She cheerfully announced that she had come to deliver the embroidery Alyssa had commissioned some time ago. Wow, great news! Alyssa was delighted to see Jody again. She ran her fingers over the fabric. The embroidery was incredibly refined and elegant. Our protagonist said the material was perfect. It looked exactly as she had imagined, and she was glad she had chosen Jody for the commission. Alyssa praised her friend's work as she placed it on the table. Jody was thrilled that Alyssa was pleased with the result. The clan master took the opportunity to ask whether Alyssa wanted her and her men to deal with that filthy spy. The man still kneeling on the floor asked whether they truly believed they could get rid of every last one of them. Alyssa admitted that she had no idea how many members his clan had. Jordana ordered one of her men to silence him. Alyssa then asked who had hired him. The spy scoffed and asked whether she honestly believed he would reveal his client. He would never disclose any information about those who hired him. Without wasting any more time, Jody revealed that it was House Greitz. She had learned that the Baron was determined to make his daughter, Lady Greitz, the next Grand Duchess. The spies they had sent carried every kind of weapon, from ornate blades to ordinary daggers. Jody sighed and said he would never succeed. He would be better off abandoning the assignment, because apparently the Greitz family was utterly incompetent. Alyssa felt incredibly proud of Jody. She truly had become a great master of the Chroma clan. The spy was horrified to hear the name of the secret clan spoken aloud. How could such a young girl have become its master after everything that had happened? Alyssa declared that Jody had done an excellent job. Then she stood up to deliver one final message. As for her unexpected visitor, our protagonist said that his employer should deal with him personally. The following day at Tessin's main castle, inside the study, a warm fire crackled in the fireplace. Riker asked whether Alyssa had eliminated all of the intruders. He looked at her while she quietly sipped her tea. She replied that she hadn't taken any action against the visitors. The Grand Duke said that was good news. He would assign a team to dispose of the unwanted guests. That way, no evidence of the unexpected visitors would remain. Riker explained that, depending on how serious the situation became, Alyssa was free to act however she deemed necessary. However, he asked her not to bury anyone in the ground because that might create even more problems for her in the future. The girl was stunned by her fiancé's words. She asked whether that was all he had to say. Didn't he even want to ask whether she was all right or anything like that? The man simply replied that the gifts he had given her had attracted the attention of many people. Because of that, he unfortunately expected incidents like the previous night's attack to happen again. He also took the opportunity to inform her that he would reinforce the security at Chateau des Lilacs, the smaller castle where Alyssa lived. At last, she was beginning to understand him. For someone like Riker, dangerous situations like those seemed perfectly normal. They were practically part of his daily life. The Grand Duke asked whether she had any other questions or requests. Alyssa assumed that he had spent his entire life surrounded by danger, so to him it was only natural that his fiancée would eventually become involved as well. The girl replied that everything was fine and that he could continue doing things however he wished. However, she had one last thing to say. Alyssa revealed that she had waited patiently for him. Now that she was always left alone, their enemies would probably assume she was an easy target. So, from that day forward, she wanted them to start acting more in accordance with the agreement they had made. A new day dawned at Chateau des Lilacs. Oh no, wait, the castle was on fire. Alyssa stretched lazily in bed while complaining about all the noise people were making. Apparently our girl had no idea what was happening outside. Then she heard someone knocking on her door. Annie and Daisy stood outside, almost completely covered in smoke. They urgently told Alyssa that they had to leave immediately. Alyssa was completely shocked when she heard that the Emerald Tower was engulfed in flames. The maids quickly helped her cover her face, so she wouldn't breathe in the smoke. Our protagonist had considered the possibility of an invasion, but she had never imagined her own castle catching fire. Outside, one of the guards was already waiting with the carriage prepared. Alyssa remarked that she thought only one of the towers was burning. The guard explained that the fire was spreading far too quickly. She needed to head to the main castle immediately. She declared that it was time to leave. Let's go at once. Inside the carriage were our protagonist and her two most trusted maids, Daisy and Annie. Suddenly they heard the horses neigh, and the carriage came to an abrupt stop. Right ahead of them, two figures dressed in black were kneeling on the road. The guard climbed down from the carriage and ordered the two strangers to identify themselves immediately. Look, it was Jody. She told the guard that they were Alyssa's allies and asked him to deliver a message to her. Alyssa quickly stepped out of the carriage, even though Annie begged her to stay inside. She instructed the guard to remain on alert. Turning to everyone else, she asked them to wait for a moment. Jody revealed to Alyssa that House Corals was responsible for setting her palace on fire. She and her clan had rushed there as soon as they detected the attack, but this time they had arrived too late. Alyssa carefully considered her friend's words. Apparently, the Corals family wanted to eliminate her for one specific reason. They wanted their second daughter, Amber Corallis, to be named as the next candidate to become Grand Duchess. Since Tessin was such a harsh land, it was easy for accidents to happen. Our protagonist remained silent for a few moments. Then Alyssa announced that she had a new mission for Jordana Pearl and her clan. She wanted the clan master to investigate the 6 major noble families closest to the imperial family: Greitz, Corals, Geronimos, Strass, Moreau, and Landfell. Money would not be an issue. Jody replied that she wouldn't treat it as a job. Instead, she would do it as a favor for a dear friend and an important ally. In response, Alyssa offered her a pouch filled with freshwater pearls as payment. There were around 15 pearls inside, worth approximately 30,000 gold coins. The girl said that the little gift should help cover the costs of the mission. Far away from there, inside the study of the main castle, someone reported that, fortunately, the fire had been extinguished quickly. Henrik explained that only the palace's outer walls had suffered significant damage. Overall, however, the losses had been minimal. Riker Tessin thanked him for the report and instructed him to announce that the fire had been accidental, so as not to attract unnecessary attention. In addition, the troops were to capture those responsible and establish measures to ensure such an incident never happened again. Henrik bowed politely and informed him that Lady Alyssa had arrived at the main castle. It would be an excellent opportunity for the two of them to spend some time together. However, Riker remained silent. A magnificent and lavish dinner had been served. Henrik continued insisting that the Grand Duke allow Lady Alyssa to stay in the main castle for her own safety. Riker appeared increasingly irritated by everyone's persistence. Alyssa finally arrived at the dining table and wondered what the men had been arguing about. The Grand Duke then turned his attention toward her. He asked whether she would like to stay at the main castle for a while. At that very moment, countless workers were busy restoring her own palace. Alyssa was delighted by the invitation and accepted immediately. However, Riker explained that she would be staying in one of the towers together with her maids. That comment left our protagonist thoroughly annoyed. He went on to explain that she would not be allowed access to the rest of the castle. For her own safety, she was not to leave her tower. That sounded strangely familiar. The maid was clearly upset. How could he go to such lengths just to avoid his own fiancé? Alyssa asked whether she wasn't even allowed to take a walk. Riker simply replied that she couldn't, even if she wanted to. My goodness, what exactly did he mean by that? Finally, he stood up from the table, explaining that he had several matters that required his attention. The Grand Duke said he was relieved that she hadn't been injured and that it would be a good idea for her to get some rest after everything she had been through. Alyssa called out to her fiancé. He merely turned around briefly to remind her to lock her door before going to sleep. The girl was left speechless by that response. She felt disappointed that she had finally reached the main castle and still wasn't allowed to enjoy herself. His words lingered in her mind. Our protagonist remarked to her maid that her fiancé always said the strangest things imaginable. The woman replied that he truly was a very strange man. Several hours later, inside the castle study, a few crimson drops fell onto the paper Riker had been writing on, causing him to stop immediately. The man coughed painfully and even more blood splattered in front of him. Suddenly, he became violently ill. Then Riker collapsed heavily onto the floor. Oh no, was he all right? Out of nowhere, a sinister energy seemed to begin manifesting itself. Outside the room, Henrik heard a heavy thud. The Grand Duke lay on the floor, struggling desperately to breathe. He heard the butler knocking repeatedly on the door, calling his name. Riker urgently begged Henrik to stay outside. Henrik insisted that if the Grand Duke needed help, he should call for him immediately. Riker slowly tried to stand up. He still looked incredibly weak. What was happening to Riker? And that is the end for part 1. I hope you guys enjoyed this story. It's such a wild ride. I love how Alyssa goes from timid little illegitimate daughter to literal hell-surviving warrior queen. And the romance with Riker is honestly so fun to watch build up. Part 2 is already in the oven, so like this video a ton so I know you guys want part 2 as soon as possible. Seriously, I can't get over how badass she is. Like, she casually took down stone wolves for 8 years straight, and now she's out here dropping assassins in her sleep like it's nothing. And Riker being all mysterious and grumpy while clearly falling for her? Chef's kiss. I need to know what's wrong with him right now. That ending was brutal. Let me know in the comments what you guys think is happening to him and who you think is really behind all these attacks. The story is called The Grand Duke's Bride is a Hellborn Warrior, and I've covered up to chapter 18. Kisses, and see you next time.